In this tutorial, we can actually take a look at the process involved in migrating RDM pointers that are present in one data store location onto another location. Now, this could be assumed that there is a data center migration project or a data center storage refresh project that's going on here. And your aim is to actually migrate everything off of the old array onto the new array. One way you would actually do this is to use the standard storage vmotion, where you just migrate the data on the fly. Secondly, you're going to use products like SRM, etc. to do it. One area that you cannot do is actually the clustering layer, or we're specifically talking about Microsoft clustering. These are machines which have got the physical RDMs present on it. Now, the way these are set up is that they've got like one location to which all the RDM disk pointers are mapped. So in this specific example, I've got like file server 7 and file server 1 here. As you see here, it's currently sitting on DSO2, which is my data store. And this is the location at which the RDM pointers are actually kept. So if we look into the first VM, that is here, you can actually see there is SCSI ID 1, 2, 3, 4 here, and these are raw device RDM mappings. And we've got like 3 data disks and one acting as a quorum disk. And here you can actually see this is the path which is actually storing this file. And likewise, when it comes to the file server 1 here, it's also got the same pointer variables that are connected to it. Now, intention here is to actually, we are moving away from the old storage array, which is actually on DSO2, onto something new, such as DSO3 or DSO1, which is a NVMe storage array. So that's the scenario. And now let's see how this is done. Now, we'll first inspect the cluster side of things before we do this work. Now, this can also be taken as assume that we have this virtual machine file07, that one, right? That's is the primary VM container or the virtual machine or the primary node that is holding all these files. So assume that this is actually corrupted for whatever reason and we are unable to actually fix it. And this is typically common when you're actually talking about patching that is destroying a virtual machine. So now we want to actually evacuate this particular virtual machine if it's possible correctly. And secondly, we also want to ensure that we empty all the data or the RDM pointers from this particular location so we can actually delete this file structure as well. So now let's open up the cluster manager here. This is file server 1. And let's check how our shares are first set up. Let's go into the node section. This is the 2 nodes which are participating in this cluster right now. And I've got just a file server role installed here. And these are my shares that have been mapped here. So let's check first shares available. It looks like everything is now working correctly. And this is the correct state of the cluster. Now, in this specific scenario, there could also be that one of the nodes is actually dead right now. Even then, you can actually get to the cluster because that's how clustering works. Now, let's actually see how we actually take out this particular file server 7 from this equation and move the data around. Now, because this is a live cluster, I'm going to actually use a save process to actually evacuate the data. Now, this might means is not necessary because if we lose one of these virtual machine, all the data will flip across to the other one. So let's anyway evict the node, assuming that this is actually never coming back. So first we'll just fail over the node first, go into the roles here and right click and go to move. And this time we're going to select it to file 1. And that's where all roles is going to be, or disk is going to be moved across. That's basically here. Now, if we go back into the file structure, they can actually see shortly that the structure will actually appear here. Okay, it looks like everything is actually now working. So now we'll go back into the file server cluster manager again. Now we go into the node section and we'll now evict this node by going into the option called more actions in evict the node. And it says that, are you sure? Yes, we are sure. We want to evict the node. And this now means that we've got like a single node in this particular cluster. So we go back into the cluster on the primary now by opening up the cluster manager, going to tools now, going to cluster manager. We can actually see that the role is being switched across to the file server 1. So we click on this one, go into the role section. You can actually see that everything is actually running and it's called only now single node on this particular environment. Now, the next task is actually now to shut this particular virtual machine correctly. So we're going to actually go here and click on shut here and continue. And that shuts the virtual machine down. Now we go into the vCenter tab here. And this is where our primary container is for all our RDM machines. So we'll now need to actually remove all these files correctly. Okay, now as our file server nodes actually now moved around, now what we can do is basically shut this particular node down as well, because obviously we want to actually move these path around, right? So because this is now mapped across this particular path. So let's see how this is done. So we'll now shut this thing cleanly. There's a couple of ways you can do this. We can actually come here and basically stop the role here, or you can put the nodes into maintenance mode, etc. But I'm just going to come here and basically ensure that I do a clean shutdown so that I can actually watch as well the power up process as well if something is actually erroring. So I'll just click on shutdown and click on continue here. That shuts the virtual machine down. We're talking about the primary node. So now in this case, the primary node is file01. Now, as all the nodes are shut, we'll now go into the file server 7. This is a primary. Now we'll go back into the file server 1, which is actually is the this one, right? Yeah, this one. And we'll now delete all the files from RDM files from here. So we'll click on edit setting here, go into hard disk section. And now we'll click on all these other RDM disks. We'll click on 1, 2, 3, and 4. We'll ensure that we do not delete these files at this particular moment in time because the mapping is actually on the 7 as well. So we'll click on OK here, which detaches all the RDM disks from this particular disk. And now we go back into 7 and go into edit setting. And this time, what we're going to do is basically come here and then we're going to actually delete the files from the data store as well. So we'll click on that option and delete the files, right? This would mean that we are returning all the files from ESXi back into the SAN. Now, the data is never going to be deleted because the data is actually on the SAN and it can be mounted. So there is a misconception that if you could actually delete the data will be gone. It's not gone. It's actually sitting somewhere else. Now, assuming that this is actually the corrupted node. Now we want to actually ensure that this is the primary node. We want the mapping files to be actually moved across to this particular location. Now, think of this as the RDM mapping file, RDM mapping VM, for example. So click and click on edit setting. And now we're going to go into the section called add devices here. And we'll go into click on RDM disk because this is the first RDM attachment here. Click on OK here. We will ensure we selected to multi-writer. We selected to next paravirtual SCSI controller here. And by the way, this paravirtual SCSI controller should be set to physical. And you would also ensure that this is set to multi-writer configuration. Going into RDM disk and click on the next one. Click on OK. And here we'll keep it under SCSI controller 1. And again, we choose the option of multi-writer. And then we'll click on the next one. Click on RDM again and click on the LUN number 4, and that is going to be under the location as multi-writer, and this is all again on B on the SCSI controller 1, and finally we'll get the quorum as well. This is going to be the quorum disk, and this is going to be in the sharing again, and this is going to be under the SCSI controller again, and now we'll click on OK. Now it's going to actually put this inside the same location where our files are. So we'll click on apply here. So that bit is now done. Now let's actually go and do the same thing on our new node as well, which is going to be file 5 as well. So as part of this assignment, what I've done is actually I've created a brand new node and I've actually installed the file server role and the clustering role as well. I'll show you how it's done as we boot up the VM. So this server has got nothing in it. I've already attached a SCSI controller here, which is set it to physical mode here. So now we'll go into edit setting and then click on existing hard disk. And this time, what we can do is to actually select this one. These are my files. So this is the first one, okay? And now I'm going to actually ensure if this is set to SCSI controller 1 and this is set to multi-writer configuration. And likewise, I'm going to actually add the existing hard disk again. And this time I'm going to go to DSO1 and file server 1 again. And this is the second disk. And now we're going to select the multi-writer again. And this time I'm going to set it to SCSI controller 1. and then select, and then going to actually add the other disk as well. So again, DSO1, we got two more disks to go. So that's one again, and third one, and finally the fourth one. Okay, finally the fourth one. And before we do that, let me just set the SCSI controller as well here. That is 1, 2, and finally add the last one, which is the quorum disk. So V1, and that is the last one, which is the 1 gig pointer file. And we'll now set this to multi-writer configuration, and we'll also ensure that this is SCSI controller 1. So all that this section is done. Now we'll click on OK here. There's one thing you need to actually check and ensure that the multipathing setting is as well set correctly. So we do that by going into the hard disk and click on this file and ensure this is set to multipathing. And again, we'll do that on the other side as well. This is also set to round robin, and we will also ensure that this is now round robin, and finally the quorum disk is also set to round robin. So it looks like it's all done. We will again validate this on our other peer node as well by going into the file server 5 tab and going to edit setting and go into the hard disk. We'll just click one of these disks randomly and check. Yeah, it looks like it's set to fixed here. So we'll select to round robin here. And likewise, we're going to actually do this on the other hard disk as well. So we'll select round robin here. And we will also ensure that we do this on the other layer as well. And this one as well, we'll change it to round robin. So that's done. So now we click on OK. So it looks like everything is now set correctly here. So now all we need to do is basically boot these particular virtual machines. So what I'm going to do is to actually run a PowerShell quickly to ensure that my SCSI IDs are actually same. So we'll click on this one and click on run here just to check if our mappings are correct. So now we'll click on the administrator account and its password, and that will give you the output and shows us where exactly are the SCSI layouts and partitions. So this is the output we have. So 1211121100, and that looks like it is correct. This is the NAID number. You can actually validate that they are all correct and in the right order. We should be okay here. So now what we can do is to actually power on these virtual machine. Now this is the primary, so we'll just ensure that that can power on first. And now we will wait for that power up process to complete before powering on the other nodes as well. So let's now open up the web console here. And that looks like it is a good power up, and we can actually see the OS is booting. That means that there's no corruption of any kind. So now we're logging into this node first. We're setting in a control del, and then we will validate if our cluster is okay. So we will now open up the cluster manager as this machine opens up, and then inspect the state of the disk configuration. So let's open up the server manager here, and let's open to cluster manager tab, going into the tools and failover cluster manager. And this time what we're going to do is to check the state of the disk. So we will ensure that we go into the cluster tab here and select the roles here. We can actually see the file server role is now running. The nodes are there's just one only at the moment in time, and we can actually see the storage. I've been going to the disk section. Looks like everything is actually online. If you select the my computer, we can actually see all the files are now here. So now let's browse the path location. By going into this one, we can actually see there are files inside my cluster location or the file server role location. So everything looks to be working perfectly right now. So now it's time to actually admit the next node into this cluster. So we go back into our vCenter and now power on the new node that is shortly to join this cluster. As the node is booted, we'll log in and we'll now install the file server role and the clustering role as well on this particular virtual machine that's going to be shared back into a cluster. So we click on manage here, go to add roles and features, click on next to continue, next again. And here we are installing this on this particular server. So we click on file server 5 here, and then we're going to ensure that we select the file server role here, which is this one. And then we click on next here. We'll also ensure that we take the failover clustering role and then click on next to continue and install. As clustering role is now complete its installation, now we are now ready to join this particular node into our file server cluster configuration. That happens from the active node. So we go back into the active node here. All we need to do here is to click on this option called add node, and then we're going to click on next to continue. We're going to need to enter the server name here. So I'm going to actually just type it as virtual machine file, and it's got check name virtual machine file, and then select my file server 5 here, and then click on next to continue here. And now this gives us an option whether if you want to actually do a validation warning. Now basically what it does is this here is that it, as soon as you actually admit a particular node in the cluster, it does a pre-check to ensure that everything is actually followed correctly as you add the node to the cluster. This will also mean that what it does is it actually takes off all the disks from this particular node, tries to move across to this new file 5's node before you enable clustering. So typically this is not done during a production kind of a scenario. So now we'll just skip that process and then we'll ensure that we click here no, so that we don't want to actually ensure there is no validation test to be run at this moment in time. And now we'll click on untick this option as well to ensure that the cluster is actually handles everything on its own. Then we'll click on next to continue here. And now we will wait for this process to complete. So it looks like the cluster configuration has been completed successfully, and we can now see there are 2 nodes in the cluster. Right now, it's now ready for our failover event now. So that happens under the role section again. So under the file server role, what I'm going to do is to actually move my role into the file server 5 we just added in, just to check if everything moves correctly. So when I go back into the file server 5 now, if our clustering has actually worked correctly, as soon as I open this up, I can actually see all my disks that are presented here. So these are all my data disks, and my quorum would actually be sitting under my main or the old file O1 node. So this is effectively how clustering works. So just to recap what we did here, what we did is we had a problem on file server 5. This originally acted as a default location or the RDM mapping location for all these clusters which were mapped to it. The scenario could also be attributed that there was a storage refresh that was going on this particular moment in time in your DC, and that data store happened to be, that is the pointer variable set to on the old data store, and we had to actually evacuate the RDM pointer files from that location onto the new storage array, which is what we actually did here with this kind of an approach. So typically what we have done is a full storage refresh cycle as well. So hope this is quite informative to you, and that's all about how to actually do the RDM moves.